Hello, this is Amy, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the Sunday, June 28th issue of the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. USA 250, New York's Role in Our History. Fight for America, how these two New York State battles proved key to the American Revolution. Glenn C. Altshuler, Cornell University, special to the USA Today Network. In a letter to George Washington in January 1776, John Adams declared that New York is the nexus of the northern and southern colonies, a kind of key to the whole continent, as it is a passage to Canada, to the Great Lakes, and to all the Indian nations. No effort to secure it ought to be omitted. Not coincidentally, two of the most consequential battles of the American Revolution occurred in New York. One of them in New York City resulted in a rout of the Continental Army by the Royal Army and Navy. The other in Saratoga gave the rebels a decisive victory. Paradoxically, both outcomes were essential to securing American independence. In March 1776, General Washington brought some 19,000 Continental Army soldiers to New York City. Aware, no doubt, that they had been inadequately trained and he had limited supplies to build fortifications, Washington told his brother he expected a very bloody summer in New York. And I am sorry to say that we are not, either in men or arms, prepared for it. On July 9th, after the Declaration of Independence was read to the troops, they tore down a statue of King George III at Bowling Green. Meanwhile, Admiral Richard Howe, his brother, General William Howe, 32,000 British and Hessian troops, and a flotilla of warships, the largest expeditionary force in the 18th century, arrived in New York. Their assignment, establish a North American base of operations for the Royal Navy, control the Hudson River, capture and occupy the city, which was dubbed Torytown because of the large number of Loyalists among its citizens, and cut off New England from the rest of the colonies. Things did not go well for the rebels, and Washington made several tactical and strategic blunders. Convinced that the British landing, which made Staten Island, albeit temporarily, the second largest city in North America, was a feint to disguise an attack on Manhattan, Washington split his already outnumbered forces between Manhattan and Brooklyn. Most important, following the disastrous Battle of Brooklyn Heights, also known as the Battle of Long Island, in which the Continental Army lost more than 1,000 troops, he found himself without an escape route. Determined to avoid excessive casualties of British troops and convinced that Washington had no alternative to surrender, Howe halted his assault on the rebels. Had he pressed his advantage, the American Revolution might have ended shortly after it began. On August 29th and 30th, fate smiled on the Continental Army. Washington rounded up all available boats in the area. He placed some of them on the Manhattan side of the East River to persuade Howe that he was bringing reinforcements to Brooklyn. Meanwhile, Colonel John Glover and his regiment of Massachusetts Mariners organized an evacuation of troops, horses, and equipment from Brooklyn. Fog kept the Brits in the dark, and strong winds blowing from the northeast kept Howe's warships out of the East River throughout the night. The operation occurred without a single loss of life. By the end of October, the Continental Army had been expelled from New York. British forces occupied the city for the next 7 years. With a declaration of martial law, looting of properties owned by supporters of independence, an influx of loyalists from other colonies, and runaway slaves seeking emancipation, a lucrative black market in sales of goods and services to the British military, and workers coping with runaway inflation. The city remained a hub of rumor, espionage, and intrigue. That said, New York City would serve as the nation's capital under the Articles of the Confederation and the U.S. Constitution from 1785 to 1790 and host the swearing-in of President George Washington. In the summer of 1777, the British Army made another attempt to control the Hudson River Valley, sever New England from the middle and southern colonies, and end the rebellion. The initiative involved a three-pronged attack converging on Albany. One army, commanded by Lieutenant General John Burgoyne, headed south from Canada. A second, led by Brigade General St. Leger, marched east from Lake Ontario. A third, under the direction of General Sir Henry Clinton, was expected to arrive from New York City. A playwright, politician, and something of a dandy, Burgoyne had placed bets in London that he would return victorious within a year. Burgoyne captured Fort Ticonderoga to great acclaim and occupied Fort Edward, but his momentum stalled with a defeat at Fort Bennington. Burgoyne's allies began to melt away. Clinton's army never arrived, and St. Leger turned back and failing to capture Fort Stanwix. Nonetheless, Burgoyne pushed ahead, slowed down, critics subsequently alleged, by 30 carriages of fine clothes and champagne. When the Battle of Saratoga began, the rebel army, commanded by General Horatio Gates, had been augmented by the arrival of patriot militia and reinforcements sent by Washington, outnumbered the British forces by 2-1, and benefited from defensive fortifications with 22 cannons behind them, designed by Polish engineer Tadeusz Kosciuszko. Burgoyne surrendered on October 7th. The Battle of Saratoga scrambled reputations on both sides. Burgoyne returned to England and never received another command. Gates became so popular that a plot developed, perhaps with his knowledge, to make him commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Major General Benedict Arnold, who believed he had not been given the credit he deserved for the victory at Saratoga, became a spy for the British. Most important, of course, the Battle of Saratoga was hailed as a pivotal moment in the War for Independence. The Continental Congress declared a national day for solemn thanksgiving and praise, the first official announcement by the new nation using that terminology. Friends and foes noted, as one British officer put it, that the courage and obstinacy of the Americans demonstrated they are not the contemptible enemy we had hitherto imagined them. Saratoga helped convince the French government and King Louis XVI, who were eager to humble England, their perennial rival, and enhance France's influence in the Caribbean, to sign a treaty of alliance with America. 4 years later, the French Navy would help secure victory for the Continental Army in the Battle of Yorktown. Less well known is the substantial impact of Spain's participation in what had become a global conflict. Spanish soldiers fought against the English along the Gulf Coast, engaged the Royal Navy in the Atlantic, laid siege to Gibraltar, and in 1779 sent an armada to invade England. Historians, alas, have been unable to verify claims that a British band played The World Turned Upside Down when Lord Charles Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown in 1781. It seems reasonable to assume, however, that Cornwallis, who had led a successful flanking maneuver during the Battle of Long Island, would have agreed wholeheartedly, if unhappily, with the song's assessment. Glenn C. Altshuler is the Thomas and Dorothy Litwin Emeritus Professor of American Studies at Cornell University. Indigenous suffered great losses in war. Michael Galbin, Ganogdagan State Historic Site. I am the director of the Seneca Art and Culture Center at Ganogdagan State Historic Site in Victor, located not far from Rochester. We represent an ancient Seneca town that stood in the late 17th century. Since we are the only New York State historic site dedicated to telling a Native American story, many have asked us to respond to the anniversary of the British Civil War of 1776 to 1783. The moment could be characterized as the moment when the Americans became themselves. However, for the indigenous peoples of the East, it was devastating. In 1779, the rebel Americans, under the leadership of then General George Washington, chose to invade Haudenosaunee territory, the stated intent to punish the Haudenosaunee for upholding their long-standing agreement with the British Crown and the mutual support it insisted on. Unofficially, the rebels were underfunded and needed to secure lands for growing their new country, as well as to pay their officers once the fighting ended. The new book, Clearing Iroquois, New York's Land Grab in the 1779 Campaigns of the American Revolution, by Travis Bowman and Matthew A. Zembo, 2025, Bloomsbury Publishing, outlines this disturbing but very real intention. 40 Haudenosaunee towns were razed. The American army invaded and destroyed countless homes, apple and peach orchards, as well as hundreds of thousands of bushels of corn. I sacrifice much of my precious word count to include these important words from Washington's orders. The expedition you are appointed to command is to be directed against the hostile tribes of the 6 nations of Indians, with their associates and adherents. The immediate objects are the total destruction and devastation of their settlements and the capture of as many prisoners of every age and sex as possible. It will be essential to ruin their crops now in the ground and prevent their planting more. I would recommend that some post in the center of the Indian country should be occupied with all expedition with a sufficient quantity of provisions, whence parties should be detached to lay waste all the settlements around with instructions to do it in the most effectual manner, that the country may not be merely overrun, but destroyed. But you will not by any means listen to overture of peace before the total ruin of their settlements is effected. It is likely enough their fears, if they are unable to oppose us, will compel them to offers of peace, or policy may lead them to endeavor to amuse us in this way, to gain time and succor for more effectual opposition. Our future security will be in their inability to injure us the distance to which they are driven, and in the terror with which the severity of the chastisement they receive will inspire. George Washington to Major Fen John Sullivan, May 31st, 1779. The invasion would draw more than a third of the Continental forces into the great raid. The gamble ultimately did pay off, although the eventual land theft came as a result of economic forces rather than at the tip of the bayonet. The British-American peace terms in 1783 saw the Haudenosaunee left out of the negotiation, abandoned by their former allies and brothers. Encroachment and frontier violence precipitated the Treaty of 1794 at Canandaigua, which buried the tomahawk and ended the direct bloodshed between the Haudenosaunee and the newly minted United States. In the months after the Sullivan-Clinton invasion, the Haudenosaunee and other Native allies sought refuge at Fort Niagara, near Niagara Falls. The refugee camps stretched for 3 miles along the Niagara Escarpment, away from the fort. The British were unprepared to support their allies. The storehouses at the fort were stretched thin. Reports were that the British were cutting caustic lime into the bags of flour they provided to their ancient allies to extend its usefulness. Historian Lockwood Doty reported that John Montour noted Lenape/Mohawk cross-cultural interlocutor suffered from eating the tainted flour. Montour lived, but the poison resulted in an ulceration of his upper lip which was quite eaten away, leaving both teeth and jaw exposed. The Haudenosaunee today continue to prepare burnt corn soup, and it is considered a delicacy, although an acquired taste. Many still recount the events which lead up to the invention of the dish. The suffering didn't end with poisoned flour. The winter of 1779 to 80 was among the harshest and coldest of the 18th century. Hundreds of Haudenosaunee perished. The elderly and the very young were taken first. Stories of the speed and intensity of the snows told of springtime, where the carcasses of frozen deer stood in their tracks, unable to find shelter before the severe snows. The Haudenosaunee sent people back to their burned-out villages to scrape together any viable sustenance left by the American soldiers. They returned with baskets of burned corn, which the people cooked into a sour broth, and some were able to survive the winter from it. The invasion, as a retaliatory strike to prevent the frontier war, was a decided failure. It accomplished none of the stated objectives. The next year would see 3 times the number of war parties coming from Niagara. The people who lived rebuilt settlements and replanted their corn from seed they managed to save from their burned-out homes. The Haudenosaunee would continue to live and eventually restore a peace for themselves and their new cruel neighbors. I inherited a mandate from my predecessors to promote the message of peace. What exactly does that mean? For the Haudenosaunee people, peace is not a finish line, but a responsibility. When the Haudenosaunee achieved a peace, it was always enshrined in an agreement, a treaty. Along with the agreement came a sacred document, a woven wampum belt or mat. Wampum is made from marine shells in 2 varieties, purple beads from the quahog clam and white beads from the lightning whelk. But that doesn't limit wampum to a binary system. They can be colored with mineral paints to alter their meaning. Red, green, and even blue paint was variously used to modify or accentuate the mat depending on the agreements or intent. Where there does the wampum mat reside that ended the hostilities between the New Americans and the Haudenosaunee? When was it made? Who made it? And was it ratified? It would not be until 1794 when the new American government would send a representative, Timothy Pickering, to Canandaigua in the Finger Lakes, where the newly built courthouse would be the site of a great resolution. The Canandaigua Treaty, as it has come to be known, would define forever the rights of the Haudenosaunee as a sovereign nation and also establish a homeland for many of the member nations. Each year, the Army Corps of Engineers sends $4,500 worth of cloth to the Haudenosaunee, the amount and quality much diminished over the past 2 centuries, but still a tangible symbol of the corporeality of the agreement. Regardless of the quantity and repeated attempts by the United States government to simply buy out of the agreement, The Haudenosaunee refuse and insist on receiving the cloth each year. Of the many nations that fought during the American War for Independence, it is the Haudenosaunee who have maintained intact their aboriginal form of governance through it all. To witness true history and true resilience, I invite you all to Canandaigua on every November 11th when the Haudenosaunee people converge and celebrate the lasting peace made in 1794 that would end forever the conflict. To brighten the chain of friendship is essential to maintaining a peace, to remind ourselves of those times and continue to work on that peace is the Haudenosaunee way. Michael Galbin is Historic Site Manager for Ganogdagon State Historic Site and the Seneca Art and Culture Center in Victor, New York. About your DNC team. Meet CJ Leathers, the DNC's new intern working in Rochester. CJ Leathers, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. Hello, Rochester. My name is CJ Leathers, and I'm a new intern here at the Democrat and Chronicle. My writing will primarily range around enterprise, environmental, and housing issues in Rochester neighborhoods. My interest in environmental and enterprise reporting has grown through my experience in journalism at the University of South Carolina. I'm a rising senior at the university, and I serve as the managing editor for the university's student-led newspaper, the Daily Gamecock. I'm originally from Charlotte, North Carolina. When I'm not writing, I'm very likely finding the next thrift store or vintage market with amazing clothes, playing video games, watching movies, or enjoying a Gamecock football or basketball game. Go Gamecocks! I attended the 60th Annual Square Fair, located in Aberdeen Square Park, on June 7th, tabling for the DNC. While being there, I spoke with community leaders and attendees alike who wanted to know more about what we're doing and who our audience is. The atmosphere was lively and vibrant, and community leaders were kind-hearted, offering me a warm welcome to the community. I plan to attend many more events and festivals throughout the summer, including the Rochester International Jazz Festival that begins June 19th. I'm excited to uncover more about Rochester neighborhoods like Bull's Head, Joseph Avenue, and North Clinton, and shed light on issues that need attention. I'd like to hear from residents, volunteers, and community leaders about the issues that matter most to them, what they were promised before and after the COVID-19 pandemic, and whether they believe the city has followed through on its promises. Several DNC journalists and former interns have done a phenomenal job covering these areas of need, highlighting both the people working to improve their communities and those facing displacement and turnover from these same neighborhoods they call home. So this goes back to you, the reader or viewer. Please send me a story tip, questions, concerns, or recommendations at cleathers@gannett.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you, Rochester, for the kind welcome. About today's Revolutionary State section, Michael Killian, Executive Editor, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. America turns 250 years old this coming Saturday, as measured by the adopting of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776, in Philadelphia. Our nation and its 50 states and thousands of cities, towns, and villages have made quite a journey in the 2½ centuries since. To mark this historic occasion, today, USA Today Network New York is revisiting New York State's vital role and remarkable history during the War of Independence. From the British invasion of New York City in 1776 to the Battle of Saratoga in 1777, to the Sullivan-Clinton campaign in 1779, to General George Washington making his headquarters in the Hudson Valley at the American Revolution's end, New York State was an epicenter of the history-making war that created our nation. On these pages today, learn of great heroism and significant suffering. Read about stirring and complex events, some of which you may well have learned about in school, and others that might be of surprise to you. And inform yourselves about people and places worthy of notice after 250 years. After you read this keepsake section, you might well be moved to visit any of the dozens of historic sites and communities where the Revolution played out from the 1770s into the 1780s. Or perhaps you will choose to listen to the soundtrack of the musical Hamilton, whose first act is very much about famous New Yorker Alexander Hamilton's role in the Revolution. We hope you enjoy the work of USA Today Network New York journalists and essays written by top historians. Thank you for your readership. Mike Killian is New York State Editor for USA Today Network New York. Reach him at mkilian@usatodayco.com. Inspiration. Sometimes a headstone is really what's remaining of a person. Woman works to restore forgotten headstones across Monroe County. Kayla Kane, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. Pittsford Cemetery is empty when Stephanie Homan arrives on a gray Sunday morning. Songbirds keep her company while the sky tries not to weep beside her. She kneels next to a moss-covered headstone and plucks at the green fibers that have crawled between letters etched in the granite long ago. This is sad, she says. You can't tell who's here. Homan has made hundreds of trips like this one to local cemeteries across Monroe County, where she scrapes and scrubs at decades-old markers until a name emerges from the decay. Many of these graves have been abandoned by the passing of time and the distance that builds between generations. Homan has taken on the invisible and often thankless task of restoring them. It was a COVID hobby that stuck. That's what I tell people, she said. The 31-year-old from Irondequoit has always gravitated toward cemeteries and finds peace in the history that they hold. She's a military veteran, a young mother, and a student of mortuary sciences working toward a career in death care. The farther back you go, obviously, the less records you have, Homan said. Sometimes a headstone is really what's remaining of a person. She joins a coalition of hobby preservationists across the country. They call themselves the Grave Geeks. Homan walks local cemeteries looking for headstones buried in green. She seeks permission from cemetery officials or families before she works and uses proven preservation techniques to help them find new life. Her tools include a Tampico fiber brush and a non-toxic cleaning solution that soaks deep into the porous stone to expel stains from moss, mildew, and lichen. The work is fairly simple, but it is not covered in a cemetery's promise of perpetual care. Occasionally, a family will reach out directly for help. Homan always says yes. To her, the work is not only about preventing long-lasting damage, but also a way to honor the forgotten. She has cleaned the headstones of entire families, Revolutionary War soldiers, and children who perished too soon. Many times, Homan will look into the person's background as a way to connect with them and their story. Today, she uncovers the headstone of Mary Barringer, a Kodak worker who died in 1949 at 60 years old. I don't know if you've heard this quote. They say you die twice. The first time is when your body stops working, when you stop breathing. And the second time is when your name is spoken for the last time, Homan said. And so I feel like by doing this work, I'm keeping their memory alive in a way. Or I try to, at least. Kayla Kane covers community safety for the Democrat and Chronicle with a focus on immigration, police accountability, government surveillance, and how people are impacted by violence. Follow her on Instagram at @ByKaylaKane. Get in touch at KCANNE@Gannett.com. Remarkable Rochesterians. Minor White, 1908 to 1976. Described in his New York Times obituary as one of the most important photographers of modern times, Minor White, a Minnesota native, had established his reputation by 1953 when he came to Rochester to join the staff of the George Eastman House. In 1955, he began to teach photography at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Rochester remained his base of operations until 1965, when he began working at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In addition to his photography, he is celebrated for his writing and his mentoring of other photographers. Memories, Rochester in the 1960s. This is a photojournalism piece, but I will share the text that accompanies each photo. There is a picture of a Rochester transit bus. It gets a final look over before going on the streets after a 1961 strike ended. Jack Nicklaus signing autographs during the 1968 U.S. Open at Oak Hill Country Club in Pittsford. Malcolm X speaks at Cornhill Methodist Church in Rochester on February 16, 1965. He was assassinated in New York City 5 days later. There's a picture of Midtown Plaza being constructed in 1961. And lastly, youngsters who never rode a trolley and parents who haven't for quite a few years get on Southtown Plaza's new trolley in this photo. Published December 23, 1961. It offered free shuttle service along the plaza during store hours. Rochester's Black Heritage Committee's Century of History. Janae Shields, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. This year, the City of Rochester's Black Heritage Committee is celebrating 100 years of honoring Rochester's Black community. The committee celebrates alongside the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. On July 4th, the United States will commemorate and celebrate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This year, the U.S. Congress invites citizens to pause and reflect on our nation's past, honor the contributions of all Americans, and look ahead toward the future. On April 11th, the committee gathered to celebrate 100 years of Rochester's Black history at the City of Rochester's Black Heritage Gala. It also honored local pioneers. In 2001, a group of employees and volunteers for Rochester established the committee to host educational activities during Black History Month. Hazel Washington, co-chair of the committee, has spent over 10 years on the board, 4 of them in a leadership role. Since joining the committee in 2003, Washington has seen its efforts expand. It is a privilege and an honor to be a part of a group that tries to educate the community on the accomplishments of African Americans, said Washington. I believe that we have a civic responsibility to make our communities safe, vibrant, culturally safe, and building communities economically. Through their events, the committee continues to uplift the pioneers of Rochester's Black history. Located in the Rochester City Hall, the committee commemorates the rich history with a wall of names for Rochester pioneers of all backgrounds. Some of the people you can find on the wall include abolitionist Jacob P. Morris, 1806 to 1866, Tuskegee Airman Lieutenant Leland H. Pennington, 1922 to 1945, publisher and poet Festus Amtak Campbell, 1951 to 1998. Marketing specialist Wendy Rose, 1949 to 2017. Hochstein music director Paul D. Freeman, 1936 to 2015. It is American history and it will remain, and we will continue to influence and shape not only Black history, but American history, said Washington. Often, African Americans don't get credit for their contributions to African American history, local history, national history, and the leadership that we have in this country now is really trying to erase our history, which is impossible. Visit cityofrochester.gov for a full lineup of the committee's events for this year, including Juneteenth. Live music returns to the Eastman Museum lawn, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. The George Eastman Museum's outdoor concert series will begin Wednesday, July 1st. Khalil Kwame Bell will perform at the first Garden Vibes concert on the museum's East Lawn from 6 to 8 p.m. Gates open at 5 at 900 East Ave. Bell's website says he is a Grammy-affiliated percussionist, composer, arranger, and producer whose work includes jazz, rock, hip-hop, European classical, world music, spirituals. Tickets, which are sold at the gate, cost $12 for members, $15 for non-members, and free to children 12 and younger. Attendees should bring a blanket or lawn chair. They can bring picnics or buy food from Open Face or one of the food trucks. Effortlessly healthy and Fairport Hots. A cash bar will also be on site. People cannot bring their own liquor due to New York laws. The other concert in the series, which also will begin at 6 p.m., are Wednesday, July 15th, Mosaic Foundation, a reggae band based in the Finger Lakes. Its members come from Ghana, Hong Kong, and Jamaica. Wednesday, August 19th, Guabaza, a Buffalo-based ensemble that blends Caribbean music with Latin jazz and blues. For more information, go to www.eastman.org/events/live music. Caterpillars Matter More Than You Think, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. A documentary will explore the hidden world of caterpillars and how important they are to biodiversity. The Extraordinary Caterpillar, a documentary film by Jeff McKay, will be shown June 29th at the Dryden Theater at the George Eastman Museum. A panel discussion will follow. Many people know butterflies are beautiful and important, but few realize that caterpillars are one of the foundations of a healthy ecosystem, said Lori Bracolo, founder and CEO of Bracolo's Bee Friendly Farm and Gardens, which is hosting the screening in a news release. They feed birds, support pollinators, and help sustain the food web that allows nature to thrive. This event is for gardeners, nature lovers, educators, environmental advocates, families, and anyone who wants to learn how simple choices in their own yard can make a meaningful difference. By planting native plants and creating habitat, we can help restore biodiversity right here in our community. Individual tickets are $25. Blocks of 10 are available for $250. They can be purchased at bracolo-lawnandlandscape.com/caterpillarmovie. The George Eastman Museum and Gardens will be open to ticket holders beginning at 5 p.m. June 29th. The theater's doors will open at 6 p.m. with the screening beginning at 6:15. The panel discussion and audience Q&A will immediately follow the film. It will focus on practical way residents can support pollinators, butterflies, and local ecosystems through native plants, sustainable landscaping practices, and community-based conservation efforts, according to the news release. Panelists will share successful projects that can be replicated locally to strengthen biodiversity, promote environmental stewardship, and create healthier, more resilient communities. The panel will feature Dana Buckbinder, Executive Director of EcoSpark Toronto, which is featured in the film. Other panelists will be Bracolo, Kira Stevenson, nature-based learning coach for the Rochester City School District, and Kevin Farrell, Senior Director of Conservation Programs for Genesee Land Trust. The event will raise funds for the Saunders Finger Lakes Museum, a nonprofit museum and educational center in Branchport, Yates County, at the northern end of Keuka Lake. The museum's mission is to inspire appreciation for the ecology, history, culture, and people of the Finger Lakes region through education, conservation, and community engagement, according to the news release. The film reminds us that even the smallest creatures can have an enormous impact on the health of our environment, and we hope attendees leave inspired to become stewards of the natural world. Natalie Payne, Saunders Finger Lakes Museum Executive Director, said in a news release. Arts. This creepy contest could put your art on a t-shirt. Laura Nichols, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. A contest has been launched to create a design for t-shirts and hoodies for this year's Survive the Sanatorium Haunted House in Livingston County. The Genesee Valley Council on the Arts also is seeking volunteer scare actors for its second annual Haunted House, which will be held in a historic 1930s tuberculosis hospital in Mount Morris. For the official 2026 merch design contest, artists are encouraged to create designs that capture this year's Blood Ward theme, which tells the story of a fictional 1930 vampire containment facility with dim hallways, ongoing operations, and mysterious experiments with theatrical horror. Designs also should reflect the vintage medical setting and include vampires. Artwork must be original. The use of AI is prohibited. The winning design will be printed on a dark or black shirt. Submissions may include up to 3 colors and text such as Survive the Sanatorium, Blood Ward, GVCA, Arts Alive, or creative wording. Submit the designs at bit.ly/4AEJS10. The contest ends July 30th. People who would like to volunteer as scare actors may select their available dates at jotform.com/form 260365374652056. Costumes and makeup will be provided. Volunteers receive a free comp ticket and raffle entry. For questions, contact Natalie at info@gvartscouncil.org. The Haunted House will raise funds for the Keep the Arts Alive campaign, which helps the council provide arts and cultural events in the region. For more information and updates, follow at GV Arts Online. For inquiries, contact info@gvartscouncil.com. Who we are. Whether it's the reflecting pool or backyard pools, it's always a struggle. Remarkable Rochester Jim Memmott. The reflecting pool in Washington, too political, too controversial, far above our pay grade. But the struggles there would seem to mirror our struggles here. Anyone who owns a pool, above ground like ours or below ground like others, knows the struggle. Pools have mind of their own. During the winter, when no one is looking, they change. Boy, do they change. You remove the cover in the spring and you stare at the water below. It is, of course, green, a phenomenon caused by what could be algae or could be the devil. Following the green reveal, owners of backyard pools do what they always do. They take a bottle and capture some of the liquid and go to the pool store. They walk in and hand the bottle to the teenaged pool expert. I don't know why the expert is always a teenager, but the expert usually is. The expert takes one look at the water, gives a shake of the head, and goes off to do a test. If the test is especially revealing, other store workers come by and stare at the results. The news is bad. The expert returns to the counter, takes out a sheet of paper, and begins to write down numbers, lots of numbers. It's like the doctor's office when you're learning about your cholesterol numbers and your blood pressure and your cognitive test. You nod, you don't understand. The pool numbers have nothing to do with blood pressure, but they do have something to do with alkalinity and maybe algae. I don't remember. The expert recommends shocking the pool. This has nothing to do with electricity. That would be dangerous. The pool is shocked by emptying lots of packs of some powder into the pool. I think it's chlorine. It floats about, it dissolves, it shocks. The expert also advises pouring some blue liquid in for clarity, and it would be good to add a bucket of calcium so the pool liner doesn't crack. That would be bad. The instructions are precise. Add shock at 6, blue liquid at midnight, calcium at dawn. In between, there's prayer, your mother's rosary, work the beads. Every spring, we say we're going to tear down our above-ground pool, create a garden, end our worries. I think I even quoted Cindy once as saying the pool was a monstrosity, or maybe she said eyesore. I sensed she didn't like it. Then every year the chemicals do their magic, the green water turns clear, a grandchild or two hops in, we put our plans on hold. Perhaps the powers that be in Washington would have the same result if they went to the pool store. Brought a water sample, let the young expert run the test. Then it's shock at 6, blue liquid at midnight, calcium at dawn, rosary throughout, clarity would come. Call the grandchildren, let them wade, all will be well. From his home in Geneseo, Livingston County, retired senior editor Jim Memmott writes Remarkable Rochester about who we were, who we are. He can be reached at jmemmott@gannett.com or Write Box 274, Geneseo, New York 14454. Remarkable Rochesterians. Let's add the name of this singer who was back in Rochester to headline the 2026 Juneteenth Festival and Parade to the list of remarkable Rochesterians that can be found online. Danielle Ponder, born 1982. Gifted with what one reviewer described as a booming, saintly voice that could break through glass windows, this Rochester native moved from serving as a public defender to becoming a full-time recording and entertainment star. A graduate of Wilson Magnet High School, SUNY Oswego, and Northeastern University School of Law, she has begun performing in Rochester as a teenager and continued to sing after she joined the Monroe County Public Defender's Office in 2011. She left the office in 2018 but returned 2 years later before leaving to devote herself full-time to music. Her first album, Some of Us Are Brave, was released in 2022, and she has performed widely in clubs, at music festivals, and on television. Obituaries. I'm unable to read the whole listing for each individual, just their name, age, and city or town. For more information, call 716-821-5555. Sue Arand, Fairport. Raymond Barisi, Webster. Mary Jessup Oaks Bausch, 98, Pittsford. Elizabeth L. Brent, Victor. Michael Brungard, 81, Hamlin. Stacy Burkholder, 48, Webster. Donald O. Chesworth, Jr., Esquire, 84, Irondequoit. Mary Cunningham, 65, Pittsford. Lyndall Lynn Ann Green, 82, Palmyra. Barbara J. Hall, 91, Webster. Richard Dick Kern, 97, Rochester. Sarah Kupis, 78, Edgecombe, Maine. Janet F. Masterson, 90, Rochester. James McKelvey, 97, Roswell, Georgia. Michael A. Montanarello, 94, Rochester. Ronald Oppart, Ronnie Eggs Eggman, 84, Brockport. James M. Owen, 84, Webster. Alberta S. Rosser, 74. Mark Thomas Rogers, 63, Rochester. Barbara B. Romanowski, Greece. Kurt A. Sowers, 44, Rochester. Gilbert Gary Schultz, Jr., Rochester. Patricia Schulman, 68, Rochester. Robert Wilson, 91, Ithaca. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, June 28th issue of the Democrat and Chronicle. Your reader has been Amy. Thank you for listening.